Welcome to the Minnesota Rovers Tuesday evening presentation. Minnesota Rovers is an outdoors club based in Minneapolis, St. Paul. Our members organize trips that range from 1 hour to 2 weeks in Minnesota or further afield. Examples of our activities include hiking, biking, backpacking, skiing, snowshoeing, paddling, and rock climbing. We also organize conservation and trail clearing trips. Our members have experience and skills in many outdoor activities, so if you want to learn a new outdoor activity, we can probably help you. For more information, go to mnrovers.org. Now let's move on to this week's presentation.
Tonight, you're here to hear from Jordan Bronston and Tim Glenn as they talk about permaculture gardening. Jordan is Chief Edible Officer and Tim is Head of Design and a certified permaculturalist for Edible Landscapes Minnesota. Through Edible Landscapes Minnesota, Jordan and Tim design and install food-producing landscapes that help their clients renew the earth, enjoy bountiful harvest, reduce lawn maintenance, foster biodiversity, and build community through shared abundance. Please welcome tonight's speakers, Jordan and Tim.
Thanks, everybody. It's nice to meet you. Hope everybody's doing well. Can you hear me all? Well, appreciate everybody being here tonight. We're very excited to present this topic that I think will be really informative, especially with such an outdoor lovers crowd. Both Tim and I, we spend most of the year outside, honestly. So it's really great to be with so many like-minded people and to provide some really great insight onto permaculture gardening and what is it, how does it work, how is it regenerative. So I just want to get a show of hands for the people that I can see. Has anybody heard of permaculture before? Raise your hand if anybody in here has heard of it. Okay, a few. All right, excellent. So there's definitely some curiosity here. So there's a lot to learn tonight. So I hope that everybody can really just keep really curious as we're coming through this information, and we'll take time at the end to go through it. But I want to dive in a little bit, just a quick icebreaker. I heard there's a lot of bikers on the call. A little bit about me. I live in Woodbury. I have 3 boys. We actually have a cargo bike. So I'm like logging miles all the time around town. We're in Woodbury, right? So we're biking to like strip malls and stuff. It's not a lot of fun areas, right? But so we're always biking around town, but we also grow a lot of food at home. So we love growing perennial, especially perennial foods. Like you'll see all those peaches, they came from our peach tree, right? Grapes, lots of fruits and things like that. So it's a little bit about me, just so I'm going to just share a little bit of how I fell into this, like love for permaculture. And then I'm going to let Tim share a little bit about himself, and then we're going to dive into like what we're going to talk about tonight. It all started kind of years ago when it was before COVID, as we all remember those days of old. And I actually, I bought a house with my wife, and we're just newlywed. We're starting to start a family and have children. And I noticed we had this massive lawn, right? And it was like, wow, we have a really nice lawn. And it was, and I like lawn. Don't get me wrong. I'm not anti-lawn. I love lawn. But I was just like, oh, I feel like we should grow stuff in here, like grow food. And there wasn't a ton of biodiversity in our lawn, right? So that year I ended up actually going over to Eastern Europe. And this is a photo I took on the right side, and it was this, they call them dacha homes or dacha homes, however you want to pronounce it. And it's these Eastern European homes. You can find them in Switzerland too, or Ukraine, Hungary, Russia, those areas. And they all have like these elaborate gardens, right? And they're just so lush and full. And a lot of these look like some typical sizes of small suburban homes in America. And it just got me thinking, wow, there's such a different use of land. And in America, again, we tend to love lawn. And I did some research when I was over in Eastern Europe at the time. And I realized, wow, I didn't realize we spend like $47 million in lawn care, and it's a multi-billion-dollar industry. And again, I'm a big golfer, right? So I'm not going to dog wants or lawn lovers here. There's definitely a place for it. I call it like living patios. But in Eastern Europe, in some of these places, I realized there's tons of these gardens, like 20 million acres of them. They supply up to 40% of the food supply. And it really got me thinking, in America, we should bring some of that back here, and I should start growing or learning about this. And so it all kind of started, that was in 2019 when I went over there, and all of a sudden, boom, everybody remembers shut down. The whole world was, everything shut down. And COVID, created this almost this event where everybody's in their homes and people are like either baking sourdough or they're like singing songs with choruses on like Zoom. Nobody heard about Zoom, and then now we're all on Zoom, right? Or people are in their gardens, and so I was in global travel working for Carlson companies, if you're aware, and it just went totally downhill. It was like Great Depression, so Warren Buffett selling stocks for airlines. I'm like, oh, this is not good. But I was so intrigued by all these gardeners, right? And I realized, oh, there's this huge movement towards like getting outside, growing your own food, baking your own bread. And, here's a little photo of my son and I actually, you know, um, growing food, a currant bush in our yard or whatever. But I saw this huge different trend. And I mean, travel's gone back since then, but there's just this huge interest in food and people growing food at home and not just gardens, but, actually learning how they can do this with permaculture principles. So that's what kind of started my journey. I'm going to let Tim share a little bit about his background, and then we'll dive into some of what we're going to go over today.
Yeah, so hi, I'm Tim, and I first learned about this stuff about 20 years ago. I had worked as a gardener and a landscaper going back. I think my first job in that industry was the summer after my freshman year of college. And right around age 30, I was paying attention to the state of the environmental movement and how troubling some of that is. And I was always big outdoors person, camping, and I learned from a friend about permaculture and just realized that there was a different way of doing things, that not only in terms of producing food, because the mainstream agriculture has a lot of problems. It's not sustainable at all. And we are also losing so much habitat. So many native plants and ecosystems are under stress and disappearing. And permaculture is a really brilliant system for protecting both of those things simultaneously. And so I kind of dove in and started to try to learn as much as I could. I ended up getting certified in permaculture design in 2009, and then just continued to learn about it. And so our icebreaker here, I love to eat stinging nettles. Everyone should eat stinging nettles. They're one of the most nutritious plants on earth, and they grow abundantly. You just need some good heavy gloves and you cook them, but they're great. So that's a bit of how I got here. So
Yeah. So we both had these light bulb moments, where we're like, it's weird, it clicks. It's almost like you start to learn about permaculture and you're like, this makes sense. It's this working with nature approach to like gardening. And so once we both had that, Tim joined our team a few years ago, but it's fun to nerd out on this because there's so many plants you can grow. So a lot of times you think of gardens, of course, your vegetable and tomato gardens, but there's so many plants that are perennial that come back every year. A lot of people don't know you can grow peaches in Minnesota, right? There's two varieties you can grow. There's tons of berries that you've probably never heard of that you can't find at the store. So there's all these varieties of fruits and vegetables and things that just come back year over year. And that's kind of part of the permaculture mindset too, is like, you can have your annual gardens, those are great, but like these perennial types of plants are just abundant everywhere, and those can be incorporated into the gardening you might be doing, and you might have not thought of that before. But there's a really great way to get even greater yields without having to do the extra work every year. So I'm going to go over the introduction, and then Tim's going to go into like key features of permaculture and help you understand what permaculture is and isn't. So today we're just going to talk about what is permaculture. We're going to go through some key features of what a permaculture garden is and how it might be different than a garden, like if anybody's a tomato or does cucumber gardens or box gardens, right? Like I have those too. They're great. We're going to dive into like some natural pest control ideas. And again, this is a dragonfly. So a lot of times you think, oh, what's a dragonfly? Well, it's eating insects that'll eat your fruit, right? It's a predatory insect. So there's some things in nature that I think a lot of times we don't make these connections to. And you're like, oh, yeah, what if we had more of those in our gardens? It's probably going to help control the population. Kind of like if we had more like coyotes around, maybe the bunnies wouldn't, be everywhere, and eating our food anyway. So it's the same thing on the insect level. You can kind of see it that way. And then there's the soil fertility part, right? Like I think we're all for garden people that are on the call, or you might be familiar of, oh, I'm going to go to Home Depot or Ace or wherever and get some more, some more nitrogen, some more amendments to the soil. But there's natural ways you can do that without having to like tap in all these products and things. And we're going to share a little bit about that today. And then we're going to leave you with some real simple steps to get started. So again, if you're like white belt to black belt in gardening, wherever you're at, I think you'll take away from this call that there's a lot that you can do just really simply just in your backyard with what you're already doing with gardening. Even if it's just, hey, I'm going to get into annual gardens for the first time and growing my tomatoes in this. And you can use some of the principles that we're going to share today to really make your garden to the next level without having to do a ton more artificial inputs and those things. So, and then we'll leave Q&A at the end. This is one of my sons in our box gardens, right? When we got started, and just to make sure that if anybody has any deeper questions or burning questions, we can address those. So cool. I'm going to let Tim take over. He's going to share a little bit about what is permaculture. And then we'll dive a little bit more into like the deep level kind of information that you might find pretty insightful.
All right, so permaculture is really best described as a design system. It's like a way of viewing your interactions with the landscape and a way of approaching how you kind of make moves in your garden. And so some basic principles is that permaculture works in harmony with nature. So we're trying to observe the way nature wants to do things, and we collaborate with it. We're not controlling or dominating. We're not working against what nature wants to do to try to get something out of it. We're the kind of science, I shouldn't say science, the kind of industrialized view of landscape management and of agriculture tends to be focused on dominating and manipulating nature. And permaculture takes a more kind of gentle approach. We're trying to observe the energies that nature puts at us and working with them to get a result that benefits us as well as nature itself. And so permaculture is regenerative. So we are trying to leave the landscape in better shape than we found it. Whereas a lot of conventional approaches to agriculture and to landscape management tend to just take and take until the landscape is depleted. So by using some of these plants that bring nutrients back to the soil, by never extracting material from a landscape, we're always keeping carbon and nitrogen in the system, maintaining keeping water in the system, and we let the biodiversity grow rather than that image on the right. You can see there's not a lot of biodiversity happening there. It's just essentially dead. And so permaculture is a closed loop. So like I said, we're going to keep materials on site if we're building a permaculture garden. Conventional approach, as you see in the right there, if you have a lawn and you want to convert it into a garden, a lot of conventional approaches would just remove the grass, load it into a truck, dump it somewhere else, and then bring in soil from somewhere else, plant your plants, and then bring in mulch, which is just a dead tree chopped into a million pieces, and throw that down. So you've got a ton of external inputs. The permaculture approach is to use whatever's on site, use down leaves, use brush, use the sod, keep all that material on site and get it decomposing, building fertility in the system so you can get a little more of a closed loop happening.
Mm-hmm. That's also like kind of like that idea of like creating no waste, is like um yeah, trying to harness the resources. Because a lot of times like this garden on the right, if somebody takes it out and it's kind of all this green nutrient matter is gone, right? But if you create a garden and you cut it, but you flip over the soil, you're keeping that organic matter on site. It's almost like an instant compost pile, right? So these just it's almost like going kind of deeper and thinking, okay, well, how can I reuse this resource? Because the grass is like it's a fertile it's already like pumping out a lot of minerals and content that can be reused and instead of having to say, okay, let's just go buy more stuff from the store to build the soil. Well, the soils already can be built.
Yeah.
And
Some people might say you need to add some compost to build fertility. So you go to Home Depot and buy a bag of compost where that sod that you have is compost in the making if you just give it a little bit of time.
mm-hmm. So even for box gardeners, if you have sod and you're building, and you build a garden box, right? You could put your sod that you cut out at the bottom of it to decompose, and then the fresh soil on top, right? That's kind of one of those ideas of a real kind of quick solution that you could do for especially the annual just straight up box gardening folk that might be on the call.
Okay, so permaculture is about designing systems that sustain themselves. And so it's focused on perennial plants. So there's the idea of kind of front loading your effort. It takes a certain amount of effort to establish a permaculture garden, but as it matures, it begins to just kind of go on its own. You have fruit trees, berry bushes, perennial vegetables, reseeding annuals that spread around, native plants that are adapted to our climate. You get these things working, and then it just like a positive feedback loop. It just builds in complexity, builds in its maturity, and starts to overproduce. So what it is not is a one-time gardening technique and there's nothing wrong with growing tomatoes. Like we said, we both
I love tomatoes. We grow them.
Both of us have annual gardens every year because it's a source of joy and we love that food and it's fun to do. But it's takes more than it gives sometimes. It's a lot of work. You have to go get new plants every year. Whereas a permaculture system is these perennial plants that once they're in, they're in. And 10 years down the line, you have fruit trees that are producing more fruit than you know what to do with. So permaculture is designed for whole ecosystems, and it's not designed for individual crops. So a permaculture garden is integrated. We're bringing different types of plants together to support one another, including lots of native plants that bring in the insects, bring in the biodiversity. So one of the big problems with conventional agriculture is you have thousands of acres of one kind of plant. And so, of course, the pest that wants to eat that plant knows exactly where to go, and there's nothing stopping it from going there other than a cloud of chemicals which they spray on it. Whereas a permaculture system is diverse and it's integrated. So there are hundreds of different plants integrated in a close proximity in a permaculture garden. So the pest insects don't find the plants they're looking for as easily. And they're also running into predators like parasitoid wasps and dragonflies. So it creates a more robust, anti-fragile system like a forest or a prairie, which is supported by that biodiversity. And that's why like a conventional agricultural setting is really a pretty fragile landscape because it requires so many inputs and so much management to survive. And so dovetailing with that, permaculture is low external inputs. We're using plants like the plant pictured here is a plant called comfrey, which we call a dynamic accumulator. It's a plant with a very long taproot that can bring minerals up from the subsoil and aggregate them in the leaves. So you can chop and drop those leaves, or you can make a compost tea from it and restore nutrients to the soil. And the plant will just keep coming back every year, building that fertility over time. Whereas in a conventional system, you're using external sources of fertilizer that really have to be reapplied year after year. And we often use the metaphor of nutrition, where the image on the right, it's kind of like drinking a Red Bull, or like having a donut. It's like a quick shot of sugar to your system and then you crash. Whereas the comfrey, it's like eating a sweet potato or like some whole grain bread or something. It gives you energy over the long term. So the permaculture approach wants to build long-term energy for the system. And so permaculture is local and community driven and ecologically focused, and is not commercial or profit driven or export focused. So that's not to say that there aren't commercial permaculture farms out there, but by virtue of the way these landscapes are organized, it really maps very easily onto more of a homestead scale. It doesn't work quite as well with the large industrial model of agriculture. So, I think we could replace a large proportion of our food supply with permaculture farms, but it would take a lot of farms. Whereas our current model, there's relatively few farms for the number of people that those farms are feeding. So permaculture is about making connections in your community. One neighbor produces too much of one thing, they can trade with another neighbor who has a surplus of another crop. And it's about supporting the ecosystem, connecting with the land, and just providing for yourself as much as you can. So yeah, permaculture integrates rather than segregates. So as I said, we're bringing functions of plants together. Jordan's going to get more into that specifically a little later, but different plants fit together in different ways. Like if you go into the forest, plants will self-organize into communities based on their ecological need. And you'll see that if you go to a forest up on the North Shore and then you go out to the prairie, you're seeing very different plants, and there are a lot of different reasons for that based on the needs of the climate, the soil type. And so a permaculture system kind of mimics that process, where we're trying to combine plants in ways that sort of builds up to a greater than the sum of their parts. The plants are supporting one another rather than competing. And so you see in the image on the right, it's just kind of a row, all one thing, all apple trees in the case of an orchard. So there's no integration, there's no complexity there.
Yeah, and I think it's important to touch on too, like when it comes to like wide scale farming and things like that, like it has its place, like, in terms of permaculture, it has its place as well. And I think on a local, smaller scale, it's kind of the best place to start is in the backyard with this, because you have the most ability to integrate all these things together on a smaller scale. On a larger scale, it tends to be a little bit more complex in how you harvest and keep up with certain things. So it's, in that regard too, I think that, like Tim mentioned, there is a need. I think there could be a bigger push towards like permaculture, kind of larger scale farming. But it's not there yet. But I think on a local level, anybody can start this in their backyard, and it's kind of like a little Garden of Eden that you can start to bring into just by little small steps that you can do with any of the gardening you're doing now. In terms of permaculture, yeah, maybe you want to touch on the principles of just how we think through like what a permaculture garden is and how it might, if any annual gardeners on the phone or on this call, like you're already probably thinking about a lot of these things, but there might be some points on here that you haven't thought of that you can maybe bring into some of your gardening right now.
Yeah, so these are the permaculture principles, and it's worth saying that permaculture as an idea was sort of invented in the late 70s, early 80s by a couple of Australians named Bill Mollison and David Holmgren. And they kind of drew up the basic principles for the approach. And so these are kind of a touchstone for permaculture enthusiasts when they're trying to solve problems on the landscape and inform their viewpoint on how to think about what to do. So we have observe and interact. So that's just a basic idea of paying attention to nature and letting nature show you what your site wants to do. So if you notice that water is pooling in a certain part of your yard, you make note of that. If you notice that there's a slope towards the north in a certain area where it's a little bit cooler than elsewhere in your yard. You notice that, and you can plan what to plant accordingly. Catch and store energy. So this can be applied in terms of water, catching rainfall, be that through a rain barrel or through earthworks, like changing topography, doing things like swales, which is essentially a ditch that's dug on contour, so it intercepts the rainwater and helps it slow down and infiltrate into the subsoil. Of course, catching sunlight, obtain a yield. So, permaculture is about getting something back from nature, and a yield can be anything. So it could be the crop of apples or whatever. It could also be relief from the bright light that your neighbor has, which is a problem I'm dealing with at my house. A nice yield would be to block my neighbor's floodlight. It could just be like the joy you get from a certain seeing the insects coming through your yard. So the yield can be anything. It's whatever you want to make it. Apply self-regulation and accept feedback. So that kind of loops back to observe and interact. So you're paying attention, and then you realize if something's not working, or if something changes, you adapt to it. Use and value renewable resources and services. So, if you have like plants that produce large amount of biomass every year, like, you can say, oh, these weeds will never stop, but you could also accept that the land is providing a huge amount of biomass that you can throw in your compost pile and add more fertility to your system, so that you can kind of see what you're finding on your landscape and see what you can use it for. Produce no waste. So we talked about that. So trying to see how you can use any material that you have access to in your landscape and use it to repurpose it. Design from patterns to details. So this is kind of in the practice of putting together your landscape. You want to observe your own behavior on the land. Like, where do you like to walk? What are your movement patterns? What are your habits? As well as watching the patterns that nature's throwing at you, like where does the water flow? Where does the sun shine? And then you can adapt your design according to what's happening. Integrate rather than segregate. We talked about that. So you're trying to get things in together. You don't want to just, we're not trying to just do individual rows of crops separated by 2 feet. Like, we're trying to get things in together so they can interact with each other. Use small and slow solutions. So that kind of, in my mind, also loops back to observe and interact, where we're not in a hurry. Nature works on its own time scale, and so one of the beauties of permaculture is it really gets you connected to the land. You start observing a piece of land over the long term. You watch how it changes. And so as you do that, you kind of realize that little gentle gestures can often have a big impact on the landscape. Use and value diversity. So that's like we're saying, integrating, getting a lot of different diverse plant life will bring in diverse fauna, insects, which just builds the resiliency of the whole system. Use edges and value the marginal. So this is a really cool principle that comes from ecology, where edge habitats in nature are often the most productive. So a good example locally is an oak savanna, where historically the oak savanna is where the wildfires in the prairie would push to the east into the maple basswood forests and burn away all the trees except for the oaks, which were fire resistant. So the oak savanna is kind of a transitional ecosystem where it's essentially prairie that's dotted by 50% or less of oak canopy. And so you get this edge habitat where you have shade under the oak and then sun at the prairie. And there are a lot of species that kind of dwell in that transitional zone. A shoreline or a wetland edge is another example. And so these ecosystems really have a lot of diversity, a lot of dynamic relationships happening. And so we try to kind of mimic that pattern in a permaculture design as well.
Yeah, and then like in a like a an example is like you have a property line with a chain link fence, right? That's a great opportunity to grow hops or grapes or hardy kiwis or any of these vining plants that you produce fruit, right? That's an edge, that's a natural edge, it's a barrier. It's not necessarily a huge ecological change, but it's still that marginal area. Or if you ever see weeds growing through your driveway, right? Like that's an edge, but it finds its way. Life still finds its way. So all those little details are like those little edges are really powerful tools to really, especially for vining plants or things like that, that can really climb or kind of take over a certain dimension that's not just 2D or on the base.
Yeah, and then finally, creatively use and respond to change. And so this is kind of just like the problem is the solution. So things will always change in nature and in a landscape. And so you have to hold the plan loosely and be ready to adapt to whatever's happening because it's never going to stay the same.
Yeah. Great. So I'm going to go on to just give you some practical tips and things that you could do. And we're going to go through a few key features of a permaculture garden. It really comes down to two different things. There's like the edible layers, right, of a permaculture garden, things you can eat, but then also the ecological functions. And when we think about these, we think about like these layers being broken up into like canopies, like the big trees you have on site, or your sub canopies, like your apples, pears, peaches, any fruit trees that you'd have, vining plants, shrubs that could be edible or non-edible, like you could have a simple dogwood or a hydrangea or something, right? But you might have some berries or things. Herbaceous plants that kind of live in just on that first layer of the soil that are both medicinal in purposes, ground cover plants that could be like strawberries that fill and suppress weeds, but also are edible and maintain some yield. Or tubers, root vegetables that are digging deep down in the ground, like your horseradishes, your rhubarbs, Jerusalem artichokes. There's even plants from the Middle Ages, like perennial carrots called skirret, right? Those dive deep down into the subsoil. They break up the soil with deeper taproots. So all those are kind of different types of edible layers. And then there's the ecological type plants that'll have different properties that either will fix nitrogen or draw on those beneficial insects you want to building soil that we talked about before. But I want to give you a real practical example of how you could do this in your own yard. So if anybody's ever planted a fruit tree in your yard, you might have noticed, and you might walk by somebody or a neighbor or something, right? And you see there's bugs all over the fruit, and it might be kind of maybe there's a mildew on it, or it's kind of might look a little bit sick. Again, this I'm talking about just plain lawn, plain just sheet of grass. And I think people have seen this before where you're like you pick an apple and it looks like, whoa, I can't eat this thing. It's like gross. So how can you avoid that? I'm going to give you a really good tip. So if anybody wants to plant a tree this fall, it's still a great time. Fall is an amazing time to plant trees. Fall is for planting. So if you go to the nursery and pick up a couple fruit trees, one or two, one thing you can do is you can build what we call like a fruit tree guild around that tree, like plants that you can bring in to help repel bad insects, but you can also bring in plants that will attract the good insects. And so I'm going to give you a list of some of these plants that you can do, and you can put around the fruit tree or in your garden if it's an annual garden as well, and it'll have that same kind of properties. So when it comes to repelling bad insects, a lot of the plants that you can do are like these aromatic herbal plants that help kind of detract the scents of these plants, kind of shoo away these certain insects. So that repels things like aphids and and ants and moths and even mosquitoes, some of them do. So some of these are like your lemon balms, your sages, lavenders, chives, thyme. Again, they're great to either use in culinary dishes to cook with. Put some chives in some sour cream, put it in a taco. Lemon balm, you make tea out of it. But they're also going to be great properties to help support that tree so that the ants and all these aphids and all these little bugs are kind of held at bay. And it might not prevent all of them, but it'll do a good job preventing many of them. And so this is an example of a fruit tree, right? You plant in your yard, you just dig a little area around it, and you can put these plants just kind of surrounding this tree, and now it's got friends, right? So it's this idea that this tree in the lawn before just had lawn and there's no companions, but now it's got this kind of more robust, anti-fragile, as Tim mentioned before, system that's starting to be built. And then now you attract in the good insects. So some of the things you can do are bringing in like Minnesota native plants for this. So then these will bring in the predatory insects that, like you said, the parasitic wasps. And we're not talking about like the wasps that'll sting you. We're talking about these really tiny little bugs that will like basically how do they do? He knows this better than I do.
I know the term parasitic wasp sounds a little bit intense, but they are generally a millimeter long. A lot of them are hard to even see with the naked eye, and they attack a lot of the pest insects. Sometimes when they're in their larval stage, it's really very diverse, so it's hard to sum up in a sentence. But it's a whole group of of insects that are predators that they will lay their eggs in some of the pest insects. Some of them will attack like the larva of a Japanese beetle while it's still in the ground before it's emerged as an adult. So you're really just kind of hacking the ecology, bringing in these insects that will help reduce the populations of these pest insects.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so all of these have like great properties, like goldenrod will both attract dragonflies for the nectar and stuff, but it also bring in like the blue stem is a great place for the like dragonflies to find a place to land on, right? And so these plants around the tree now, you start to build this fruit tree, what we call a guild, and you put some of these natives around the tree. Now this tree is like double protected. It's got pest repelling, but it has good attraction for those good beneficial predatory insects. And it looks nice too, right? Like these are pretty plants. Like they're not, you're not putting a bunch of weeds around here. I mean, you have to pull them. That's a good thing to do. But you bring these in and now this tree's happier. And then the next part is like, okay, the bug pest control part, figuring that out, but how do you build fertility around these trees? And so what we've seen that works really well are two different parts again. One is nitrogen fixing plants, and then the others are like soil building plants. And they're both a little bit different. The first one basically pulls in atmospheric nitrogen out of the atmosphere and puts it into things called like nodules in the roots of the plant. So a lot of these plants like clover is one of them, or the pea family, or there's some shrubs that will help basically create like a more fertile soil environment, right? Especially when things are turned over. Do you have anything to add with nitrogen fixing on how it works?
Yeah, it's primarily the pea family that does this. There are a few others. It happens through a relationship with bacteria in the soil. But it's kind of one of if you've heard of the Three Sisters garden, where it's corn, squash, and beans. That's the function that the beans are providing. They're helping to add nitrogen to the soil to support the other two.
Mm-hmm. And so some of the ones we love to use but are very common with a lot of gardeners is like the micro clovers, the red clovers, lupine. There's even berries like gummy berry or buffalo berry. Buffalo is a native too. But those all have those properties. So sometimes including those within like even an annual garden, including some of the micro clover as a ground cover to suppress weeds, but also fix nitrogen will help create a more robust environment for your plants to grow. And then here's an example. You put some red clover around this tree, creates that nice color. You put some of these kind of beautiful spear lupines in, right? That'll help create, again, more nitrogen fixing, but it looks cool and it's good. And each of these bloom at different times. So you might not get cone flowers in this at the same time, but you get the idea of different colors throughout the year around the tree. And then soil builders are the other aspect of the equation. And so the difference with soil building is unlike drawing atmospheric nitrogen out of the air and putting in the nodules, what you're doing is they're mining, they're like miners, right? Like they're going to mine the soil of all these trace elements like nitrogen, potassium, phosphorus, magnesium, calcium, and they're going to put it in their leaves. And so some of these plants, they might go 10 feet down into the soil. So they'll go behind, like under. So if you have sand or if you have really dense clay, it'll go under that and it'll pull up all those trace minerals. And it starts to create um, like the perfect type of a composting plant that will instantly give that charge to the soil that isn't just like drinking a Red Bull and going and putting fertilizer on your garden bed soil. It's like putting true, like it's like putting eating a sweet potato. It's going to add a lot of really dense nutrients. And so the one we like to use a lot is comfrey. There's borage and chicory. Those are ones that you could use too. The two issues are chicory is going to spread everywhere, so we wouldn't recommend it. Borage is one that would is really pretty. It doesn't spread as much, but comfrey is kind of what we call the MVP. And there's a variety called Bocking 14. It's the rootstock version. You shouldn't go buy comfrey seeds. Just anybody listening on the web in this YouTube video too, just don't buy the comfrey seeds. You have to get Bocking 14, the rootstock. Don't buy the seeds. It'll spread too much. You don't want that. I just want to make sure you know, don't buy the seeds. The rootstock version has like the perfect nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium ratio. So it's basically 2.6, 0.8, and 4.5. So this ratio is like kind of the perfect ratio the soil requires for those trace elements, right? To create really highly productive soil that the plants can feed off of and grow. And each of them have different properties, right? And again, that's putting it into the soil from the subsoil. And that's the difference between the soil builder plants versus the nitrogen fixers. So again, in this diagram here, I have like, we had all these pest attracting plants like your lemon balms, thyme, chives, and sage. Well, there might not be room for that sage, so just throw in a comfrey, that Bocking 14, and that'll be the soil builder for that environment. And so I want to just show a quick example of like for any of the annual gardeners out there of a way to get started. And actually, Tim will just kind of touch on this to end, and then we'll take questions.
Yeah, so say you have a blank slate, you want to do something, we would recommend just starting with a tree or a bush. So you pick an apple, pear, peach, plum, cherry, whatever you like to grow, just make a choice and then kind of work down vertically. So we can go from the tree to a bush and, you know, you want to try to, you know, factor in the sun and soil requirements, which is pretty, that'd just be on the tag, or anyone at a garden center can help you with that information, just to make sure it's reasonably well suited to your site. And then just follow the process Jordan just outlined, where you start to surround the tree, you know, add some of these herbs. Any of the alliums like chives, garlic are great, lavender, mints, sage. These are all really good options. Dill. So any of those culinary herbs are always a really good option to start throwing around there.
And marigolds too in your like annual boxes, right? So that's
Yep.
a good one for annuals. You can put chives and things in there as well, but or you know some of the nitrogen fixing plants, but marigolds has a really great companionship with tomatoes for any of the tomato gardeners out there.
Yeah, I mean, what's one way of thinking of this aspect of permaculture is that it's kind of like companion planting taken up to another level of complexity. Because I think a lot of people know that you can plant marigolds by your tomatoes and it'll help the tomatoes. So we're taking that principle a little further and using it to sort of create a more complex system based on those ideas.
Yeah.
So then add some native flowers. It's always good. Native plants are they're easy. They evolved here, so they don't need extra water. They've evolved over millions of years to just survive with our natural rainfall. They're hardy and they're incredibly beautiful. Jordan and I always joke that, you know, a native plant is like a wolf and a cultivated plant is like a French bulldog. And not to come down too hard on French bulldogs, but
I like French bulldogs too. Yeah.
but there is a kind of a pure beauty to a native plant that I think you guys all probably appreciate if you're a very outdoorsy group of people. And the bringing in the ecology and the insects is just an added bonus to this, where you plant these things and they just show up immediately.
Immediately, that's crazy.
Yeah, like before you've even
Yeah.
planted them, actually. Like you pull a blazing star off of the truck and there will be a monarch on it within 1 minute.
Yeah.
So it's really remarkable. So you
Yeah.
just start getting some of these native plants into your yard, and the rest will take care of itself.
Yeah, and the cool thing you mentioned too is they've like evolved with our climate and our world here, right? So a lot of cultivated plants, the root system's shallow, right? So they don't always stand the test of time. A lot of these natives, the root systems are deep and they don't require as much water and resources, and they're just really highly ecologically sought out plants because again, some of those cultivated ones might not draw on as many of the insects you want just because they're not as aware. The insects are like, I didn't co-evolve with this plant, so I want to find one that I co-evolved with. And so that's why again, a lot of the fruit trees are cultivated, right? Like they did. So there's a place for cultivated plants, but in terms of the pollination and predatorial type plants that'll draw those insects in, I think going that route for the flowers is kind of the way to go. Um,
Yeah, and then add these nitrogen fixing plants to add fertility. So you can use the clover. It's really easy to seed. It can take off. Lupine, you can kind of hit two birds with one stone because lupine's also a native, so it'll bring in the insects and pollinators while also fixing nitrogen. But the clover ground cover is a really nice alternative to grass. It's nice to walk on, and it's really quite easy to get established.
mhm. Yeah, so for any annual gardeners out there, again, if you have boxes, you mow around them, you're like, man, I can't stand mowing around these things. Good way is just rent a sod cutter like Ace or whatever. Take out the sod and just go to Gurdon's and grab a bunch of micro clover and just seed that area. And it'll be just so nice to have something that is not just like grass and you don't need to mow it around those box structures. And it'll help bring better conditions of the soil for if you do any gardening around that area. The other thing is Gurdon's, for people who are in the Twin Cities, that's kind of the go-to spot for plants. They've really gone down on their native and edible selections in the last few years, so it's a really good place to go to get flats of things. There's a lot of sales going on this time of year, so it's not too late to get into this. So definitely recommend, checking out their native and edible section at Gurdon's for anybody looking to do a little bit of this in the fall season before the snow hits.
And then get some comfrey. It's a beautiful plant. It will provide an virtually endless supply of fertilizer without you doing anything. So you can, if you like a project, you can take some leaves and soak it in water for a month or so and make a liquid fertilizer. You can cut the plant down after it flowers and just leave the leaves in your garden as kind of a green mulch, and that will fertilize the garden and it'll pop up again. Or you can just let it grow, let it die, and year after year it'll add fertility. So it's an incredibly useful plant.
Yeah. And again, Bocking 14, not the seeds, just so you don't make the mistake and you're like, I got comfrey seeds and now it's everywhere. You want it to grow like a hosta, just in one spot over and over every year, reproducing. And again, there's a lot of videos you can make compost tea, and you can just literally take this, like Tim said, put it in these gardens, just keep batting your soil and just building it over time. These principles work. And I've seen it because I was the guy, I planted a bunch of trees in my lawn, didn't support them. Just the fruit was terrible, everything. They looked horrible, right? And you can really do an amazing service to the things that you buy for anybody gardening out there by just giving them a little bit more love in terms of ecological support. So those are all the 5 steps that we just said. Take away for everybody on the call. I'll just leave it on here just so anybody can take a peek at this, or if you're watching this in a different session, you can take a screenshot and remember this info. And moving on to the last part, again, we talked about like a small local solution is foodscape, right? So if you're doing annuals, bring in perennials. That's one of the blazing stars here. You can see just the monarch. It's just beautiful. And yeah, you'll just have a lot of fun. That's my son with the Minecraft. Sure, he likes Minecraft a lot, but we like gardens too. So hey, we like both technology and plants in the 21st century. So yeah, anyway, this is another cool food for thought is I tried to like research this. I couldn't find info. So of course I asked like, oh, I'm gonna ask AI, and you gotta take it for a grain of salt, right? But I think that, most if you do a lot of these perennial plants, like a lot of times like um we purchase 4 to 5 pounds of food every week at the grocery store. But if you do, you plant a tree, you'll be amazed. Like again, this is I think like 100 pounds of just peaches, right? And you can freeze them, you can can them, you can do a lot with them, give them away to neighbors. So every single perennial plant like this can really produce a lot. And the fur on the peaches, I never mentioned this, but that helps repel pests too because they don't like the fur. So I'm going to leave it at that and just open up for any Q&A for anybody on the call, and happy to answer any questions or be a contact after the call if you just want to brainstorm ideas or talk through what you're doing. And any advice we have, we do free consults, so we're happy to be a resource.
We've got some questions. Thank you, Jordan.
Yeah.
It's really interesting. Thanks for the intro and the overview. We do have some questions in the chat. Do you want to look at them, or would you like me to read them for you?
I could look at them.
Okay.
What about weeds in the lawn? What about the weeds in the lawn you use to start the composting pile? Oh yeah, what about the weed seeds, and
Yeah, if you get your compost pile hot enough, it should take care of the weed seeds. The exception being if you have any like truly invasive plants, and if you can do a little Google search on like something like creeping bellflower or garlic mustard, those are probably best just put in the garbage in a sealed plastic bag. But the common stuff like dandelions, creeping Charlie, lamb's quarter, Asiatic dayflower, like any of the common annual weeds will be killed by the heat of a compost pile.
Mhm. Yeah. And a lot of times too, like when we see if there's a really aggressive weed like that, that's like and the seed banks build up, then that's when we do. Again, it's there are use cases where we're hauling out the soil because this isn't good.
Yeah, it's also
It's better to bring in new stuff here, but
if you have a
yeah.
really aggressive population of weeds, it can be really good to take a no-till approach, because there could be trillions of weed seeds in the soil. And if you go through there with a tiller, or if you even just dig too many holes, you're exposing them all to the oxygen. You're kind of like waking them up. So you can actually inadvertently make your weed problem worse. So it could be good to just kind of work on top of what you have, and the weed seeds will gradually die after a certain time.
Yeah. Yeah, because usually we let like the new compost pile beds sit for several weeks before they're planted out, just to give enough time. So if you do an instant garden like that, you need to let it sit in this heat of the sun for several weeks so it can just decompose naturally. So the second one is I have a ton of creeping Charlie. As it sounds that I could take up that sod, flip it upside down in a box, cover it up and decompose, or should I flip it upside down in place, cover it with leaves, mulch, and let it decompose where it sits? I'll let you answer this one.
Yeah, I'd say the latter. So another term for this is lasagna gardening. So you want to create layers of essentially carbon and nitrogen. So like the sod and garden weeds are a nitrogen source. Leaves and things like cardboard, paper would be a carbon source. And you want to just kind of get them alternating. And then you need water and oxygen, and just the chemistry will do its thing. So if you can get a lot of layers stacked up. Yeah, there's an image there.
Oh, I just lost it. Sorry. Yeah, here's an image.
Yeah. And if you Google lasagna gardening, people will generate recipes for lasagna gardening that get kind of complex, and it doesn't have to be very complex. You know, just get some stuff and stack it and get it wet and let time take care of it.
Yeah, I'll answer the next one. I know you mentioned a couple in Australia from the 70s and 80s, but is there any connection to permaculture and indigenous communities? I'll let you answer. My thought is that, yeah, I think the indigenous communities, I think, were more attuned to these things. I think that they see cycles in ways that I think, like, again, I'm like a Westerner, right? Like, we're a lot linear, like the way we think about things, right? I think that a lot of those indigenous communities saw more closed loop type systems. And so I think there is a connection with that, but I'll let you kind of,
Yeah,
yeah.
I think there's kind of a spiritual link there. Um, because in the case of Australian Indigenous people, they were very nomadic. They didn't really cultivate the land in the same way that what this is about. This permaculture really was kind of born out of the 70s environmental movement. And if you remember, like peak oil was kind of a thing back then. This is before I was born, but I've read about it. So I think it's in the spirit of the kind of deep awareness and respect for nature that you'd find in the indigenous communities, but it's not in the case of Australian indigenous communities, there's not a direct link. However, there is especially a lot of influence from Amazonian indigenous communities in a lot of permaculture thinking, because there were a lot of techniques uh, being practiced in the Amazon where they were building soil in certain areas of the forest. And so you can look into that. There's like a technique called chinampas, I think. It's like the floating beds that were built. They would mat up, kind of creating like raft beds using the material that was on site in the forest. So there is kind of, I'd say broadly, there's like a spiritual connection there and a similar worldview.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of neat. I think we have a book it's a native book and it has all
Yeah, I
the
don't know where that is.
it's somewhere around here. I should look for it, but it's got like all the native names. It's called like the Dakota people, native in the Dakota people. You can look it up on Amazon. It's something the Dakota peoples and native plants, and it gives all the native names for all the plants that were here. And some of them like American groundnut. Like the history. It's like a potato bean. It's a cross between like a potato and a groundnut bean. Like a peanut, and it has 3 times more um, basically protein than like a potato, but they grow as tubers. They're a vining plant, and then they have these like runner tubers, and you can dig them up and eat them. And the natives would actually like give them, at least orally, what we've heard in our oral tradition is they'd give them to the settlers that were here, as a food source in the winters, right? Also like the Three Sisters gardens, that would be considered like more of a permaculture technique that was more done by like the native communities and early settlers and stuff like that. And so I think that there is a lot of crossover, whether it's direct or indirect. But again, the movement towards like the true kind of permaculture ideas that were really kind of born out of the 70s and 80s.
We have about 7 more questions here.
Great. Cool. I heard that using cardboard as mulch dries out the soil beneath it and maybe isn't the best option to kill weeds in an area prior to replanting with something else.
That would only happen if you didn't get it really wet enough. It does take a good amount of water to get it soaked. But the cardboard itself wouldn't contribute to drying the soil.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, usually like what I've seen is that I've been doing this for several years and done a lot of sheet mulching techniques and stuff. When it's not wet, that is where it's like it can create issues. You really have to get it sopping like super wet.
It takes a lot
if
more
it's a
water
hot
than you
day,
think.
you have to like keep it going before you put the soil on it. And you need to really add compost to the cardboard because without like without the layer of like organic matter, it's not going to decompose properly. And you really need it to decompose properly for it to really be effective. Otherwise, you're going to have sheets of just cardboard that are going to almost like get petrified in a way, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's like this thing never decomposed. So, any good reference books? One of them we mentioned was that one that was like the Dakotas people. Yeah, and I can grab a few others here.
We have a few in the office here. This one is called Gaia's Garden by Toby Hemingway, and it's a good kind of entry-level home scale permaculture guide. If you want to go back to the original sources, there's like both David Holmgren and Bill Mollison wrote books. Like the Permaculture Designer's Manual is a big thick tome that if you're really going in, but that one actually goes into like the desert and the jungle, and it applies to anywhere in the world. This guy is based in Oregon, I believe, and he does touch on some different climate situations in different bioregions, but it's a good kind of entry-level guide to it.
Yeah, the other book here, and we are off season and we want to just read a lot of books, because it's going to slow a little bit, which is good because we want to learn. This is a good book. It's called Practical Permaculture. If you enroll in like the OSU, Oregon State University program, they'll give you this book, or that you have to buy it. They're not going to give it to you. But there's anybody can get certified in a permaculture design certificate. There's 10 and 20-week long classes. There's tons of different schools that do it. It's a good guide. The one I was talking about with the native plants, it's called Cultural Plants to the Lower Sioux Indian Community. Good plant. This is a good book. It's just a lot of cool pictures of plants, and it's very simple, but it's just a lady from a virtual school of Minnesota gave me this, and I was like, this is awesome. It's probably coming in backwards. The other one is called the 8-Step Path to Creating a Food Forest. I don't think this one is as deep as the ones that Tim shared, but this one is definitely like more of just a really almost like the Spark Notes version of what you're doing. So again, this is when I started. The guy who helped me build my food forest did that. And then if you like flowers and stuff, this is a cool one, just like the wildflowers in Minnesota, just to get more acquainted with some of these different species. And so you can look for them.
If you guys all probably frequent a lot of state parks, these Stan Tekula field guides are pretty common. You've probably seen those around.
So any ideas for convincing squirrels and rabbits to not bother the garden? So I always say squirrels are like 3D, they'll like do everything. Rabbits are like 2D, so rabbits you can actually keep out of the garden. There's a lot of products on the market, rabbit scram, this and that. None of them work really well. Like if you're like, I'm going to put garlic in in some amulet next to they're going to eat it, So what you want to do is just invest in a nice critter fence. The two products that I most recommend are one you can get at Home Depot. It's just called Critter Guard. It's a green coated, basically stainless steel kind of gauge wire fence, and it's about 2.5 feet tall. And they can't chew through it, and it looks decently well because it's green. It kind of fits into the garden, and it's not gonna it'll just protect the rabbits from going in. You always want to do that for specifically foods that they're going to eat. The other product that you can get, it's called Critter Guard. They're a wholesaler, and they have like gates that you can get with it. And it's more of a traditional chain link feel, but for bunnies or deer. And so so not to talk too much about our business or whatever, but when we do a project, we always will never do a project if the client won't let us fence in the foodscape or the food forest or whatever it is, because we don't want the bunnies to eat your plants, because in the baby stage they're so vulnerable. You just don't want them to you want them to focus on growing and not just being food.
It's also worth mentioning that once the permaculture garden kind of starts getting mature, the rabbits cannot keep up with the rate of growth of the plants. And so it's not a problem after a certain point because the garden is just producing so much biomass, the rabbits won't even really make a dent.
Mhm. Yeah, so we always like the goal is to get our clients to pull out the temporary, rabbit fencing or deer fencing. Um,
Not landowners.
any thoughts about how non-landowners could get involved in permaculture? Are you aware of community programs, small scale patio options? That's a good question.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure about community programs, but you could absolutely do this in pots. You'd take the same principles. Um, I've even seen articles on like houseplant guilds where you pair different houseplants together to help support. So it totally works. Like the trees are a little harder if you're using pots, but if you're dealing with a patio in an apartment or something, a townhome, you could definitely start applying some of these principles. Use a few berry bushes and some of the supporting plants and just experiment with it. It's actually a pretty cool way to just experiment with some of these principles and see what works.
Mm,
But yeah, unfortunately, it is a thing that to take it to its fullest like final stage, you need to sort of invest in a plot of land. Um, you could also potentially speak with community garden managers and see if there's any room there to sort of get something more perennial established. And maybe you'd have to be okay with not taking ownership of it
Mhm.
permanently, but sort of cultivate it, steward it for a while.
Yeah,
So I'm sure if you're creative, there are a lot of ways you could
yeah,
experiment with this stuff.
yeah. And there's a lot of people, like even residents, like we had a guy who's we did a mini vineyard project for, and he was like kind of this home pastor guy, and one of the guys in his community, um, at his small church or whatever, was gardening on his land because he lived in an apartment and was like, I just need to be outside. And he was kind of in a recovery mode, out of drugs and stuff. So he was like, the guy was like, yeah, use my land, start gardening it, like, and it's kind of the permaculture ethic is like, there's always people out there that are like, it's such that kind of shared abundance mentality of like bringing people together. And kind of growing together. So it's kind of amazing. That's why we're starting a foodscapers community and trying to connect people that are doing this, that are both, working with us or not, or just doing it themselves, right? And so
Yeah.
that's another kind of, if you can find people like that, and
Yeah, or find a neighbor who might be less mobile and they're having
Mhm.
trouble keeping up on their yard work, just kind of knock on their door and propose reclaiming part of the yard for a project like this. And, there's a lot of options.
Yeah. The last thing too I didn't mention is just inside the home stuff. Like, um, there's ways that we can just be more permaculture minded of like creating no waste. I think we're all guilty of that as Americans. I for sure am, right? Like you're doing too much, um, reusing things, uh, uh, being, even in this permaculture book, I mean, it's funny, they talk about like compostable toilets and they talk about not flushing the toilet, um, unless it's number two, I don't know. Like, it's like there's all these different like lifestyle things. So there's almost a level of permaculture that's deeper than just the garden side. And it's like the way that you interact with like your environment, right? And how you use resources.
Yeah, there are
Um,
there are people out there who are applying permaculture principles to finance and to every type of thing,
mhm.
business practices and things like that. So
Yeah. Any recommended websites? You probably know a few that would be good.
yeah, well, permies.com, we were just talking about that.
Hermes.
That's kind of the the original permaculture message board. So there's a lot of people on there. You can look on Reddit too, permaculture. And then I'd say just explore. There are different um, schools, places, different farms that have permaculture going on, and they love to share what they're doing. Yeah, you have to, you know, be careful. Sometimes the permaculture world attracts, like, let's be honest, like just full on hippies who it takes all types. You'll find libertarian preppers in permaculture, and you'll find like Wicca crystal witch types in permaculture, and everything in between. So like I'd say if you find a website or a YouTube channel that's about permaculture and the person is off-putting to you or doesn't agree with your politics, then don't give up on the whole thing, because every kind of person does this, and it's not political. It's not being interested in this doesn't say anything about the kind of person you are. So, I've definitely had to ignore a lot of permaculture content out there because it's ridiculous. But at its core, if you go back to the sources, the original ideas of permaculture, you can get some good information.
Yeah, like there's some sites that'll be like, you shouldn't ever weed and just let weeds. They're like supposed to be there. It's like, no, you should keep the things you want and get rid of the things that are invasive or they're gonna not be good.
I've heard permaculture people online saying that you're not supposed to ever kill anything, not even a weed. And no one ever said that. That's a ridiculous idea.
It's almost Janist in a way, right?
So
Like
that's not a lot.
thing.
There are people who try to make permaculture about their personal ethics or politics, and that's not what it is. It's just a system for managing your land. So if anyone tries to infuse their philosophy on it, I'd say be skeptical.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a place for truly everybody to grow and learn. So. When growing fruit trees on semi-dwarf rootstock, plum, peach, pear, and maintaining a height at 7 feet via spring pruning, how far apart do you recommend spacing the trees in rows? If it's semi-dwarf rootstock, I mean, there's a few ways to go about this, and Tim can elaborate, but, a lot of times you do like the 12-foot spread, right? If you're creating like a wider hedge. 15 if you want like a trail between them, because most of them go about 12 feet wide. But there's like we have one client who's like doing like literally 6 foot really tight spacing because they want some trees to grow up higher and some to grow like there's a cold hardy nectarine, I guess, that can grow like almost horizontal on the soil. So there's different methods of doing this, and I think that's the whole idea of sometimes like people who go really dense in the planting, they might not get as much yield per tree, but per the whole system, they get more yields. I forget, is that syntropic row or planting? Is that what it's called, right? I think you can kind of talk on that. Yeah.
It really depends on what you want to see and how you want to interact with your space. Some people like the clean look of having more space in between everything. Other people like climbing through and moving branches out of the way to get to other plants. And, it depends on how you want to interact. If you go into the forest, the plants are not placed 12 feet from each other. Like they're climbing all over each other. So you don't necessarily have to adhere to these strict spacings. And if you're choosing the species widely, then things can grow interplanted quite close without competing. So.
And I personally, this is me, I'm not speaking for everybody, but I like to give more space than less for the fruit trees because I like to like walk between them and not like push branches out of the way. But again, that's just me. I mean, others are like, I want to just go dense and make it truly like a forest, and you're like lost in the forest, which is cool too. But for me, I think I like that experience of almost, I don't know, for me, I like that almost like I'm walking around in like Eden and just picking fruit and not like having to get a stick in my face.
And it also depends on your situation of your neighbors and your neighborhood. A lot of neighborhoods have certain expectations about how the landscape is supposed to look, and we never want anybody to just become the pariah of their neighborhood by having the crazy yard. Like you can definitely do this and still maintain a landscape that nobody is going to raise an eyebrow at. You can arrange the plants in a way that nobody would even know that wasn't a basically conventional landscape. So
Yeah, so I would say answer the question 12 feet distance for a safe hedge, 15 if you want a trail in between in distance. So, 12 to create like a wider hedge, 15 if you want to walk between it. And if you really want to not, if you, or just go in every 6 or 7, like you said in there. So the straw or hay that is moldy make acceptable mulch layer.
I would want to compost it. I wouldn't want to just mulch it. If that's what you're asking, but yeah, get it. I would compost it first. I wouldn't incorporate it into the lasagna gardening technique. I would get it nice and hot inside the compost pile just to kill the mold off. But that is definitely useful material that you don't want to get rid of.
Yeah, do you have any suggestion for shady areas? Yeah, I think for shade, there's the things that are going to do the best are like ones that don't bear fruit, like your herbaceous medicinal herbs, your perennial vegetable things with larger leaves, like things like rhubarb can tolerate more of that because it has larger leaves that capture the sun. It's almost like a rainforest bottom, right? Like it's gonna soak it in. Um, some of the berry plants are more shade tolerant than other plants. Like I think the currants and gooseberry varieties tend to be a lot more shade tolerant than raspberries that really want a lot of sun, right, to produce. Um, I think that like things like service berries can tolerate, or June berries they're called. If you don't know what they are, there's another book, The Service Berry. Read that one. But they tolerate decent. A lot of those grow on forest edges or within forests as well. So you don't let shade be like, I've heard this a lot of times, like I got this shady place and I can't grow anything. If you're not seeing mold, um, then you probably have enough part sun to still grow some berries and things. And as long as you have good morning and evening sun and maybe part scattered sun in the day, a lot of times that's not terrible because what you're getting is the water table isn't like it's kind of in a way like a little bit more of a wet environment, it's not drying out so quick. And some of the plants can get really scorched. So sometimes people are like, let's cut down all these trees and just plant fruit trees. And I think it's a terrible idea. You're ruining habitat for birds and things that are already existing in those finding habitat. And some of those trees are the canopy level that's providing the good nutrients, dynamic accumulating leaves, and the shade that you need to help protect the ground a little bit from the heat of the hot July time, right? So I think if you have shade, figure out if it's full shade or part shade or part sun, and then I would just say plan the specific plants in those environments. Again, if it's really wet, you can do a lot of dill and cilantro and things that'll reseed around that you can use in dishes as well. I think it's the last question. Or any more? So, you have anything to add with that? With the
Oh,
shade?
yeah.
Yeah, a good ground cover for shade is we've been using, it's not a native, but like sweetwood roof is a decent ground cover that'll spread and cover areas if you don't want to use like a moss or something like that. What are some other coriander or not coriander, columbines are really good for shade.
Wild ginger.
Wild gingers are decent for shade. Um Trying to think about perennial edibles, but perennial spinaches should do decently well in that space, like a King Henry spinach, sea spinach, things like that. Sorrel, lovage is another good one. Lovage is good for stomach aches. We're not, full disclosure, I'm not a medical doctor. Go seek one if you have an issue. But there are some plants that, obviously have over-the-counter medicinal benefits if you're looking for that, and you can research those. So.
Well, I think that is all the questions, and thank you for the presentation. This was really informative, and thank you for, the great answers to all the chat questions.
Thanks for watching this Minnesota Rovers presentation. If you want to see more, please click on the link to our channel or the subscribe button below. Thank you.